On May 29, 1453, the sound of the world's largest cannon shattered more than just stone walls. It shattered over 1,000 years of history. This is the story of how one man's obsession with conquest ended the Roman Empire forever. For over a millennium, the walls of Constantinople had stood as an impregnable barrier between East and West. The Byzantine Empire, the last remnant of ancient Rome, had survived the fall of the Western Empire, countless sieges, and waves of invaders. But in 1453, a young Ottoman sultan named Mehmed II would bring weapons to bear that the ancient world had never imagined. This wasn't just another medieval siege, this was the collision of two eras. Medieval fortifications versus Renaissance firepower, the old world versus the new. And at the center of it all, the largest cannons ever built in human history. Constantinople in 1453 was a shadow of its former glory. Once the jewel of the Byzantine Empire, controlling trade between Europe and Asia, the city now controlled little more than its own walls. The mighty empire that once spanned 3 continents had been reduced to a single city and a handful of surrounding territories. Emperor Constantine XI, Palaiologos, ruled over fewer than 50,000 citizens, protected by walls that had been built over 1,000 years earlier by Emperor Theodosius II. These weren't ordinary walls. They were a triple-layered defense system stretching 3.5 miles across the landward side of the city. The outer wall stood 20 feet high. Behind it, a 60-foot gap. Then the great inner wall, rising 40 feet with towers, reaching 60 feet into the sky. For over 800 years, these walls had never been breached by enemy force. Sultan Mehmed II was just 21 years old when he ascended to the Ottoman throne for the second time in 1451. His father, Murad II, had conquered much of the Balkans, but the great prize, Constantinople, had always eluded Ottoman grasp. Mehmed was different from his predecessors. Where they saw an impregnable fortress, he saw an engineering problem to be solved. He had studied the failed sieges of the past and identified the key issue. The walls were simply too strong for traditional medieval weapons. But Mehmed had access to something his predecessors didn't: gunpowder artillery on a scale never before imagined. In late 1452, a Hungarian engineer named Orban approached the Byzantine court with an offer to build massive cannons for the defense of Constantinople. Constantine XI, despite the dire threat facing his empire, couldn't afford Orban's price. So Orban took his offer across the Bosphorus to Mehmed II. The young sultan immediately understood the potential. He not only met Orban's price, but offered him 4 times what the Byzantines could pay. Within months, Orban had constructed the largest cannon the world had ever seen. The great bombard measured 27 feet in length and could fire stone balls weighing up to 200 pounds. The cannon was so massive it required 60 oxen and 200 men just to move it. When test fired, the sound could be heard from 10 miles away, and the impact created a crater 6 feet deep. But this was just the beginning. Mehmed ordered an entire arsenal of giant cannons, turning the Ottoman siege into the world's first example of artillery-dominated warfare. While Orban built his mechanical monsters, Mehmed assembled the largest army in Ottoman history. By spring 1453, over 80,000 troops had gathered outside Constantinople's walls. Janissaries, regular infantry, cavalry, and specialized siege engineers. The Ottomans also constructed the largest naval force ever assembled in the region, with over 120 ships positioned to blockade the city from the sea. Constantine XI, meanwhile, could muster only about 7,000 defenders, a mix of Byzantine soldiers, Genoese volunteers, and a small force of 700 Genoese Marines, led by Giovanni Giustiniani, one of the era's finest military engineers. The odds were more than 10 to 1, but the Byzantines had those legendary walls. On April 6, 1453, the siege began in earnest. The sound was unlike anything in medieval warfare, a continuous thunderous roar as Orban's great cannons pounded the ancient walls. The largest cannon fired only 7 times per day. It took 3 hours to cool, clean, and reload after each shot. but each 1,200-pound stone ball that struck the wall caused massive damage. Sections of wall that had stood for over 1,000 years began to crumble. The Byzantines fought desperately to repair the damage each night, using everything from rubble to wooden barrels filled with earth. But they were fighting a losing battle against the relentless bombardment. The defenders weren't helpless. They still possessed one of the ancient world's most feared weapons, Greek fire. This mysterious incendiary substance, whose exact composition remains unknown to this day, could burn on water and was nearly impossible to extinguish. Byzantine defenders poured Greek fire on advancing Ottoman siege towers and troops, creating walls of flame that stopped multiple assaults. They also stretched a massive chain across the Golden Horn harbor, preventing Ottoman ships from attacking the seawall. But Mehmed had an answer for this too. In one of history's most audacious military maneuvers, he ordered his ships to be dragged overland, uphill, around the Byzantine chain defenses. 70 Ottoman ships were pulled by oxen and thousands of men over greased logs, bypassing the harbor defenses entirely. After 53 days of bombardment, Mehmed ordered the final assault for May 29, 1453. The great cannons had blown several breaches in the mighty walls, and Ottoman morale was at its peak. The attack came in waves. First, irregular troops and volunteers charged the breaches to exhaust the defenders. Then came the regular infantry. Finally, the elite janissaries, the Sultan's personal guard, and the finest soldiers in the Ottoman army. Giovanni Giustiniani, the Genoese commander who had organized much of the defense, was wounded by a cannon shot and carried from the walls. His departure caused panic among the defenders. At the critical moment, a small group of janissaries discovered that a small gate called the Porta had been left unlocked. They poured through this breach and attacked the defenders from behind. Emperor Constantine XI, seeing that the city was lost, made a decision that would echo through history. Removing his imperial regalia so he couldn't be identified, he grabbed a sword and charged into the melee at the walls. The last Roman emperor died fighting as an ordinary soldier, his body lost among the thousands of dead. The Roman Empire, which had begun with Augustus Caesar 1,500 years earlier, ended with Constantine XI's anonymous death on the walls of Constantinople. When the Ottomans breached the walls, the age of medieval fortifications effectively ended. Mehmed's cannons had proven that no wall, no matter how massive or ancient, could stand against the new gunpowder artillery. Constantinople became Istanbul, capital of an Ottoman Empire that would dominate the eastern Mediterranean for the next 400 years. The city's strategic position, controlling trade between Europe and Asia, now served Ottoman interests instead of Byzantine. Many Byzantine scholars fled to Western Europe, taking with them ancient Greek texts that would fuel the Renaissance. In a strange way, the fall of the last remnant of ancient Rome helped trigger the rebirth of classical learning in the West. The siege of Constantinople was more than just the end of an empire. It was the moment when the medieval world gave way to the modern age. Orban's great cannons didn't just destroy walls built of stone. They destroyed the military assumptions that had dominated warfare for over 1,000 years. The thunderous roar of those cannons on May 29, 1453, announced to the world that the age of gunpowder had truly begun. No fortress would ever again be considered impregnable. No empire would ever again be safe behind walls built in a previous era. The Roman Empire was dead. The modern world was born in the smoke and thunder of the world's first artillery bombardment.